Well, welcome everybody. I'm Mary Ellen Slater, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And I am very excited to host this panel with you. We're going to be talking about how to future-proof your engineering team for your fintechs. And I love this topic because, like, before I moved into content strategy, I was a financial journalist for many, many years. And I've been around doing this long enough to go back to thinking about when traditional banks were scrambling and trying to figure out how to do this stuff, to looking at like the true sort of native fintechs popping up and the way we look at, blockchain and all the things that, they think like got the tech. But to me, the most interesting part was always, what do you do with the people? Because people are actually what make financial services run, right? It's not really about the tech. You've got to have the right people building the tech. You've got to have the right people, thinking about it and solving problems and thinking about your customers. So I'm very excited about this panel. Everybody's kind of saying where they're coming in from. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana now. That's what I call home. It's nice and warm here today and very sunny. But what are we going to talk about today? We're going to be talking about, and we got all these changes going on, thinking about blockchain and AI and regulatory changes. How do you anticipate the skills that you'll need for this? There's nothing, if banks used to be sleepy, kind of stable places to work, that isn't true anymore and hasn't been in a little while, right? How do you adapt your hiring strategy to this reality? If things are changing really fast, the idea that you might just be able to go out and hire a group of people and kind of set it and forget it, that's not really going to work as well. How do you adapt and create that culture of continuous learning? Because the changes in tech or the tech stack, they're evolving so fast. You can't just say, well, I've got a degree and now I'm done. It's like, no, we haven't been able to do that for a while either. And then the last but not least here is I want to talk with our team here a little bit about remote work, because I think, that's always been a touchy subject in financial services. Fintechs, kind of jumped ahead and were able to embrace it to their competitive advantage in recruiting, frankly, compared to the more traditional financial services companies. But now we're shifting back toward return to the office policies. In some cases, our financial services companies are the ones that are really into it. And I think, obviously, I believe that there's still a place for remote work. I run a remote company. I work with other companies that have remote teams, but I think it's become a very tricky conversation in this industry specifically. So I am very excited to pull together our panel here today. And I'm just going to start over here. I'm going to start with you, Bernie. So coming in from X Team, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and why you are so passionate about this topic.
Well, actually, thank you, Mary Ellen. So it's really interesting because everything you've described happens in real time at a pace that's really difficult to keep up with. So X Team actually represents the world's most experienced software staffing augmentation group. So we're actually partnering with all of those different organizations to address those specific needs. And those needs are ever changing and almost impossible to keep up with. So what we do is have that remote software staff augmentation team to be able to help fill those gaps on projects, short-term and long-term. And I have a special passion about this because my undergrad is actually managerial accounting. So I've seen all
I didn't learn that until we started working on this project together. It was like, I can't picture you as an accountant, man. Sorry, can't do it. All right, well, let's go to our next panelist here.
All right. Hi, my name is Chonan. Really glad to be here today. Just a little bit on my background. I've been in technology field for the last 25 to 26 years or so. And early in my career, I started out working for Fortune 200 companies and kind of worked my way up. Last 10 years or so, I started doing a lot of, I would say, startup fintech work. I'm a 3-time CTO for various startups. We raised millions of dollars and, both in equity and debt, basically, better tested CTO as much as you can get. And right now I run my own consulting firm. I operate in the intersection of AI and fintech. My clients are typically fintech companies and banks.
You have to tell us about Hyperion Soft a little bit. Tell us what y'all do. It's kind of cool.
Sure. So these days, as you know, generative AI has kind of been spotlight for the last couple of years. So we're specialized in building out voice agents for some of our clients. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, we also do a lot of machine type of advisory and consulting work for our clients. Usually we look at a lot of data. We help them try to slice and dice it and then build useful predictive models to maybe help default or things of those nature. So that's kind of the space that we operate in.
Okay. All right. And Julia, what about you?
Hi, I'm Julia Valentine. I started in fintech in the 90s, before at the very beginning when we were, recent graduates, and instead of going to investment banking, we were going into fintech because the demand was so great. And so I got to work on the tech side on Wall Street for various investment banks. I was at JP Morgan for a long time, investment bank technology. And then went on to buy side and was at D. Shaw, was at a very large top 10 family office, and was CTO and CEO of a pension fund, was 110 billion of assets under management. And then I launched my own tech consulting firm that does a variety of technology, provides a lot of technology services, basically a variety of them. And I'm on the board of a bank, and a lot of the advisory work that I do is really around fintechs as well.
Mm-hmm. And so I think when I was, sort of building up this panel and reaching out to y'all, I was very excited because I think that you have such diverse experiences around this. Because I think one of the funny things about financial services and fintech is like it covers a lot of ground, actually. So I think there's go to our next slide here. Let's see if I can. So what do we even mean when we say fintech, right? Because fintech can mean I've got a traditional bank that now has to give me, I'm a consumer and I want my consumer banking. I need that experience. It can mean blockchain and crypto, right? It might mean how your payments get processed. It might mean that personal finance agent that is there, but it also means insurance. Like I was actually in another conversation with a client this morning. We were talking about risk models for insurance and like the role that people are pension funds. I think, Julia, you worked in a pension fund, and you were the CTO of a pension fund. And it's like, you think, do people think of pension funds having CTOs? Well, then pension funds are fintechs, like in a lot of ways, right? Or the crowdfunding things that we use to raise money for charity. It's like there is so much that falls under this. Investment banking is different from consumer banking. And
one quick comment. I think a couple of years ago, I heard there was a saying, every business is a fintech business. I think there is some logic to that, because at the end of the day, you're a business, you're dealing with money, right? And so you got to do something with that. And you do that well, you are a fintech, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Every industry has some level of transfer of assets, right? So it really does touch everything.
I think I want to kind of toss this out here, and I'm going to start with you, Julia, because I'm dying to hear your answer to this question, just given how long you've been in leadership roles in this industry. What is different now? Like, what has changed? Like, why this does feel different?
Well, I think that by and large, in terms of trends, I would focus really on two, right? So the first one is a lot of companies that are smaller. They're kind of in the SMB, right? Small and medium-sized business category, no matter how sophisticated. So let's throw family offices into this.
Mm-hmm.
Offices, fintechs? Well, some are, I would argue, and some aren't, right? It depends on what we mean by the term, but a lot of small-sized firms that manage a lot of assets, they begin to realize that you cannot just completely outsource fintech. And so they, because they really want to, right? They want like a one-stop shop, like, I just want to buy one system and it's going to do everything for me. Mm-hmm. Or like, I want to hire one team and it's just going to do everything. Do you know what I mean? Kind of like, let's just do it and move on. And instead it's becoming very clear to them that there's got to be some kind of a hybrid model, right? Like you're going to buy 80% and then someone has to get the last mile, as we call it. Mm-hmm. Right? So like, how do you do that? So that hybridization, how do you run these hybrid teams, which includes that remote option as well. That's also a hybrid, right? So optimizing for hybrids is one. And secondly, obviously, AI is upending everything because right now people build software and they're using agents, and people do all sorts of things in cybersecurity. There are more incidents in cybersecurity simply because of the use of AI. So AI is like forcing the issue, if you will.
Chanan, I'd like to hear your answer to that too, because what I think is interesting about your career is like you haven't only been in fintech. So I'm going to give you the two-part for this, which is one, how is it different now from before, and how is fintech different from other industries in terms of thinking about how we adapt to on the talent side? Like what makes this so hard to hire for?
Right, that's a good one. So what I think is right now, what we're seeing is, in a fintech as an industry, I think has gone through some type of roller coaster ride, right? I think 10 years ago was really hot in the beginning. There was a lot of conferences and everybody was like jumping in to kind of get a piece of pie. But then I think maybe like starting from 5-6 years ago, I think the industry itself took a dive. But one thing that came out of that was a lot of these fintechs, they started to work with banks, right? And so banks are seeing, how these little fintech companies are starting to, take over their lunch, basically, right? Because a lot of people, the young people, they can bank on their mobile apps, right? They don't have to go to the physical bank branch to, get their banking needs done. And so I think a lot of banks are trying to learn from what these fintechs have done, and then that is part of the culture, right? But then, of course, there's a little bit of indigestion because essentially the cultures of banks are different from cultures of fintechs. But you can see banks are trying hard, to innovate, because they at the same time, banks need to break even. They need to turn a profit. So there is no way that can kind of turn a blind eye to what's happening. So they're trying their best, right, to adopt these fintech movement and trends and cultures and technology stack into, the bank's own setup. Now, comparing, I guess, fintech versus non-fintech, I think the thing about hiring for fintech staff is, in my world, I always thought, hey, if somebody in the beginning, I always thought, hey, you could just find some engineer, come in and start building fintech software. But actually what I've learned, from my own experience is that you want to find people that have appreciation for, things that relates to finances, maybe even things as simple as accounting, right? If you have an engineer that kind of understands and appreciates basic principles of accounting, he will make a great fintech engineer. And same thing for product, right? And I think a lot of times people also don't get is that in fintech, you gotta you gotta watch what the regulations, because you cannot build a product that just kind of come in and break things, right? If you're like starting to break things, then the regulator is going to come down and break down your neck, and you can get into big troubles if you're and you can get summoned by SEC to go to answer for all these things you've done. So you want to kind of be careful on those fronts. But otherwise, I think fintech is still a very exciting industry to be in. As long as you know the basic things that you need to have, you can actually do some really wild things, and that's what I think is happening right now. Yeah.
Bernie, I'm going to kick this to you for a second, and then I'm going to I got a quick poll that I want to run for the audience. But Bernie, you don't just work in fintech. I mean, you do serve some of Exeem's biggest fintech clients, but you do work with some others as well. What do you see as the biggest difference right now with talent, like in filling these jobs for fintech versus, frankly, everybody else? Are there differences?
I would say the differences are nuances. It's less, the actual core stack for the technology can be very similar. But to Cho's point, if there's an advantage to working either in healthcare or fintech, media, gaming, or others, then that's a nuance that's really valuable. But I think what Julia pointed out too is that hybrid environment is so important. And that's one of the reasons our customers come to us is we practice and have remote developers in 58 countries around the world. So we really have a follow-on strategy to be able to allow that that pace of change to be mapped in a different time zone and then reviewed again the next day and then build it again. So those are some of the things that I see are unique, but nuanced rather than probably extreme differences.
Can I add quickly? I would say that one thing that's unique to fintech is that there's probably the proverbial 20-80 rule. So there are probably 20% of people who are experts in one particular area of fintech. So there are people who can do pricing and valuations, for example, and you can count the good ones. Probably there's maybe 20 of them in the country, or like 100 in the country. And they know it inside and out. A lot of them go into consulting simply because they can do a project for one company and then go and do a very similar projects for another company, because learning something like that takes like 10 years minimum of just doing that, right? So they're literally experts who understand the intricacies of finance, right? Like around pricing of financial instruments or like something super specialized like that. And so these are the people that you're never going to outsource them ever, there are 80% that, if you can get somebody remotely at a fraction of the cost, you're going to go for that. Do you know what I mean? So there is definitely that. And I've not seen that kind of requirement for expertise in every industry. Do you know what I mean? Like you can figure out probably, like if you're writing something in healthcare, you can probably figure that out, or somebody can give you a spec. Whereas in fintech, for super specialized stuff, a spec is not going to help you. Like you need to understand.
It's funny. I always put healthcare and fintech in the same category. I often bucket that of I think of them as things that it's like your money or your life category for content. It's like you can't mess this up. Like whether for regulatory reasons, you can ruin somebody's life. Like so those are I think they are delicate.
But I'm just saying, like if you're coding something and somebody gives you a spec, like a reasonable person understand it, right? Whereas in fintech, like without special kind of background, you won't get it. You just can't do that, and you can't write a spec that's like specific enough.
Right.
Yeah. You just like go to an expert and be like, here's what I want. And they already know what you want because they've done it before.
And Julia brings up a great point that, well, again, one of our roles is to augment the apps and be a member of your team.
If you had to scale really fast right now and you had to go get 100 awesome engineers for your fintech, what would you do?
Yeah. So
no. I said we're not.
Yeah. So I think obviously the first thing I would have to do is stick to a certain principle, right? And I think some of the best things about hiring is if you stick to, slow to hire, fast to fire. I think that is always a good thing to kind of go with. I know it kind of in the opposite direction to your question, but let's hear me out, right? Like it's super important, right, to find your first couple of hires, right? If we're talking in Star Trek stance, I want my number 2 or Spock to be right next to me, like somebody I can trust and rely on, right? And that's somebody that would take time to hire, right? But once you've kind of identify a few core team members, right? From there, you can really tap into the network and hire from the previous companies or prior engagements. That's really the way you scale things out, right? Mm-hmm. So never try to like rush hire. Like I know people do that. Like they go to Indeed and they throw out a job description and they try to hire everybody there and all of a sudden. But I would say like the first initial few best to come from referral. But then once you have your core team to a certain size, then of course if you need to continue to scale, then you can tap into outside vendors such as X-Team or other offshore vendors. They are very strong, right, in sourcing great talent at a really cost-friendly price tier. Mm-hmm. And that's how you further enlarge your team. And that's kind of the strategy, I will go about. But regardless, I think one of the things today we need to kind of pay attention is, I think if you operate in the fintech space, you would be better off finding people that have appreciation for working with data, right? Because kind of data is kind of lays the foundation for a lot of things that we in tech. We're not even talking AI right now. We're just talking about data, right? How to work with data, how to set up the right data pipelines, how to clean your data, because a lot of that sets up the foundation for your financial platform. So if you don't get that right, you don't have a fintech business.
I spent quite a bit of time meeting different customers across different industries. And technical chops is a given and all the other things. But to the point, the question I hear most often from everyone is the culture. What can we do to make sure that this person fits in either a startup environment or a multinational or some of the world's largest customers? Because that culture, and Cho kind of referenced that, is those first hires, they have to fit in that culture, whatever your culture is.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said, because especially with the fact that the best hires that you're going to make are hires by referral. And I think that that also creates a great culture, because you already know these people, you know their values. And when you know their values, and every developer wants to work remotely. Like, I've not met one developer who said, I want to be in the office. I mean, seriously, it's like, maybe in the pandemic when there are a lot of kids at home and like you really need to, get away from that. But other than that, just trusting someone and knowing that it doesn't matter where they are, they have the values, the right values, and you also know really well how to monitor the output. Like, you basically know what they're doing when they're remote. You know what I mean? You know what to look for, you know your metrics, you can monitor this very effectively, and the whole team is very adept at that. And those are the best teams. And if they've already built something similar in the past, then they're just good to go. But you know what I mean? It's like almost like a team, and then you build around them. Yeah, and I think it's a recipe that's everybody's pretty much doing it that way, right? Yeah, if you want to. Well, yeah.
Agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course you need to know the process, right? And the person who's running the team needs to understand how to set up the team. What's the process? You have the code reviews, you have this, you have that. What tools do you use? Do you know what I mean? Because if you can plot the process on top of that, then you can scale infinitely quickly by adding more people.
I have something to add, Julia. I think you brought up a good point. I think process is really important. The other thing is KPI, right? People are working from homes. Dude, I'm not gonna try to track your effort every minute of the day, because it's not possible, right? You gotta be responsible for your own work, and the way I can track it is through some type of KPI, right? Like today, right now, I'm drinking tea, right? But people can be drinking Tunisian whiskey while they're working. It's fine with me, but you got to deliver. You have to make sure you write your software the right way, and it meets the requirements of the software. Then you can do whatever you want, at your own time. That's fine.
100%. But the tools that we have now, right? You can, anything from Jira to ClickUp. So basically, for any size organization, you can get excellent free tools like Deploy and ClickUp. Everything that's going on. You have full transparency into that. Do you know what I mean? You implement a couple of basic things like your worksheets, time worksheets, where you report, what you've done. You can review this, day by day, for the entire month, right? And all that. So I think that, once you kind of, especially if you worked for a very large fintech, like JP Morgan, that spends billions of dollars on technology, you have it drilled into it. You know what I'm saying? Even if you're doing a small project, you're still applying the same project management discipline to it. And you pretty much have your tool, here's what I want. at the end of the, week, like, here's how I'm tracking it, right? So then for you, where the person is really less relevant because you're giving them the most important thing, which is the flexibility, right? Like you can.
I want to bring this in. I did sort of one of our next poll here about people's biggest challenges, and like one of the ones that's we got AI and automation, but also cybersecurity, which is something I know, Julia, is near and dear to your heart. And I think AI has made it more complicated, but cybersecurity was also a part of the issue with remote work in financial services, because you are handling very delicate, data here. And I think that's often what keeps people from embracing, of course, but like the shift. So how do you address cybersecurity risk?
So basically, look, because remote work is not new, right? This always happened. At least we knew that it's part of your disaster recovery business continuity planning, right? At all times, aside something were to happen, we all have to stay at home. What do we do? Blah, blah, blah. So 30 years ago, we were defending the perimeter. That's out the window completely, right? Now there's zero trust, right? So it's basically the exact opposite, right? And philosophically, we're saying that, hey, instead of defending my metaphorical house, right, that has like 8 bedrooms, I would prefer that you don't even know that I have a house, and you're never ever going to find out how many bedrooms are in there. Like, you just you don't even, my preferred method is you don't see it. And any device that you use is subject to risk management, right? Your personal phone as much as your work phone, because people, think that we have like this footprint that's like entirely work, but that's not true. You can go in and log in an internet cafe, or whatever. So essentially what's happening there is that the company overall is responsible for all of the cybersecurity protection and management, no matter where your, employees and contractors sit, and even if they are in another country. And there are some countries where we'll worry about the data, right? There are some countries where if you save your data on that server, the government of that, some of the countries has full access to it, period. Like, they can go in. China is an example. The data laws is such that you set up an office there, they can go in and take anything that you have saved on your local server there. So it becomes, a very tricky and an interesting exercise where you are assessing where are the waters, right? How do you do this? And what do you do with data? And, what's your recovery plan and all that? And so that's another team that you essentially are managing. So in addition to your development engineering team, right, you're also managing a network admins and a huge infrastructure that you can outsource, but still be responsible for managing and risk managing it. Yeah.
I can add a couple of things to that. So I think it was November last year, I went to a cybersecurity panel. I was a panelist. We talked about large language models and how do we, put cybersecurity around these services. So I think some of the top themes that I took away was, all these things about zero trust, the basic cybersecurity infrastructure, they don't go away, right? It's not because today we use AI, you can forget about those. That's not true. Like, the same principles apply. You need to have these governance in place, right? You need to have your EDR, right? Endpoint protections. Control these environment to make sure that, the data don't go to the wrong people, right? Because today, if your team is using, the public version of ChatGPT, whatever you put in a prompt box, it's out. It's probably, it's given. It's probably going to go out to the public at some point, right? So you need to make sure, if you want to use AI or large language models, maybe they should be local to your setup, right? Or maybe it's in the enclosed network where maybe only certain can access. that would work, but you have to provision it. You got to take the care and the time to make sure these things are deployed properly for your employees in an enterprise environment. So that's like the real, from a tool perspective, that's how you mitigate these things. But I think at the end of the day, like the number one thing is building a really strong culture. I think culture really it's strategy for breakfast from Peter Drucker, and I think that continues to be applicable here, right? You want to make sure like everybody in the team is vigilant about what tools to use and where do data go from here, and how to manage them properly so that they don't fall into the wrong hands. So these continue to be actually very practical advice for people that are in the fintech space.
And very specifically, many of our customers in certain industries, financial services, healthcare, and others, they actually provide provisioned laptops to the developers themselves that are dedicated to protect the enterprise from any type of bad behavior, if you will, or bad people. So that's a very common practical solution that we see all the time.
I was going to say that's so you sort of build in the VPNs and build those layers. But hopefully, I really wish that everybody would just treat it that way, because you have my data, like anybody who has my data, like I wish you would just go ahead and provision out that laptop. And to me, it doesn't matter if people are on site or off site. I think sometimes we told ourselves stories about on site productivity and on site security that weren't true.
Well, you know what? The thing is, depends also like which stage of the project are you at? You know what I mean? When you're in maintenance mode, who cares? When you're really brainstorming and you're like, what's the tech stack and what tools like there's also in I think in engineering, there's the creative parts of the process, or at least innovative, creative, you know what I mean? Where you need the whole team probably to sit there and brainstorm and have a conversation. And then there's some periods where maybe that's not, that critical. Do you know what I mean? Like once you make certain choices, now it's task dependent. So there is always this desire to optimize, right? And the question is, why are we constantly kind of binary? It's like we're on site or we're remote. It's like, okay, we're looking always, it's an optimization problem. Do you know what I mean? Like for you at this stage, what the heck do you need? And by the way, if you hired like the network administration team that's sitting there and running your vulnerability scans, you don't want them on site. Do you know what I mean? Like you want them to sit there because they will deal with the sick days, holidays, 24/7. Do you know what I mean? Then we're think about like, oh my God, this person is out sick. I'm like, what am I going to do now? Just like, well, so that's always outsourced and that's perfectly fine. So I feel like a lot of these conversations are just a little bit more, they play into the culture of the company rather than the needs of the development. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
HR is like, where are my people? What are you doing?
HR doesn't care. HR doesn't want you to come back to work. Like,
are you kidding me? No. I mean, there's like everybody within the company, has a different kind of view to that, right? And the bottom line is that engineering process involves a lot of different phases, even for one company with one project, let alone for a huge company. And the bottom line is, how can you really create the optimum environment where you weigh kind of like saving on commute time, you hear me? Versus getting everybody together when you really need to and all that. And you have to be like super creative and super proactive for that.
Yeah, I have something to add too. I think the separation of various software environment is actually key to more productive remote work, right? What I mean by separation of environment, you have typically in software engineering, you have developer environment, and then you have QA environment, you have staging, and then you have production, right? So let's, have all the remote workers work on the dev or, test environment, who cares? Like, there's really nothing like tangible as long as we're sure that these environments are concretely segregated, right? Then it's fine, right? And that's typically the model. Like when I use offshore teams, I would never let them touch production. So I always have my one trusted team members that would do the deployment. And so that's the approach that we took. And I think till today is still very, very useful. And I think also today, another trend that we're seeing is, a lot of the programming or software development environment that have moved to the cloud, that there are IDEs today, right? They are 100% in the cloud. The code doesn't even go to the local desktop or laptops. So that's actually really good. And I think we should leverage some of those tools or tool set, right, to help, to make sure that security is integral to everything we do in software engineering and for fintech.
Well, I looked at Azure for a project, and I don't track it that closely, but I just learned that last year Microsoft dispensed with admin access to Azure, and now it's completely role-based account access. So everything is controlled. Like, you cannot just have like blanket access, right? So I think that this is what you were referring to when you're saying like you need to be vigilant, because even as you're giving people permission to your repos or just anything that you're doing, it has to be configured just so. And there's got to be like this constant vigilance and review of like who's got access to what, and if they got hacked, like what's that going to affect, right? What's going to get stolen, right? You don't want your entire code base to be gone, right? Like you want that one language model or not everything. Yeah. So and I think that there's just there's so many details, Bernie, as you were saying, like there are details. Is that what you were referring to? So there's little bit nuances, right? That's some of the things that we have to manage.
I would add one qualifier. I'd add one qualifier to this, is that we also work with some pre-revenue startups where some of those engineers have to have full stack responsibilities. So I agree in principle with the segmentation, but in some cases you're working with 3 total employees, 4 total employees, and they have to touch every single element. But that goes back to why that culture conversation is so important, because when you're in a startup, you've got to be nimble and you got to be flexible and you can't get stressed about certain things. But some people work really well in highly structured environments like Cho described. So that's where that culture fit really is important.
Yeah, but you know what? Even if you have a super tiny team and you're pre-revenue and you have like a bunch of people and you have them as monthly people, you can still get your 3 hours of a lead developer to do the code review, and another 3 hour of your release management team. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can do the hybrid even between monthly versus hourly employees and still build in all of these controls and structure. And it's even more important, you know what I mean? Because you don't want that one full stack developer to walk away with something. So you can technically, or at least advise the client, like build that in. So it's not.
Yeah. I think separation of duties is really critical. I think the sooner you get that in, actually, it is for the whole company. I mean, I've heard a lot of horror stories where
me too.
Key admin or developer walk away with access, and like went to Canada, right? And trying to run away, and it's crazy. And even right now, I don't mean to bring politics into this, but look at what Elon Musk is doing, right, to our Treasury Department. He literally has young kids really hacking into our system because a lot of people have root access. And that's why they're able to move really fast. Now, I won't comment whether what he's doing is good or bad, but I'm just trying to point out, when you have one or few individuals that have access to everything, it becomes really dangerous.
Yeah, this is
very dangerous for fintech.
Practices. Do you know what I mean? Best practices, like just build them in from the very beginning. It's a little bit more difficult and it's a little bit more time, but best practices are lessons learned by large companies that made these errors and lost millions of dollars and huge setbacks in product rollouts and all that. And And we all know the stories when people walk away and then people are like, oh, they will never do that. They'll never jeopardize it. They have equity. I've seen people walk away with the gold and they're co-founders and they have equity. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I mean, I really know the situation. And it's terrible because all of these poor people who put in the diamonds, who equity and money and whatnot, and they're about to go live and they have to rebuild from scratch. So,
or sometimes they do it by accident. Sometimes, it's not about I meant to do a walkout. Sometimes people delete things. Sometimes people accidentally mess up things. Like I find that accidental happens even more than intentional. It's and you still don't want that.
No.
So,
well, and back to something Cho said, if you just imagine it, and again, this isn't a politicized statement, the pace of change that a CTO would have to, or a CFO would have to work through the administration and all of the rule changes, everything that's happening, what an impossible job to do to sit around in a room by yourself. I just can't fathom that.
Yeah. Well, right now, I think you need to look at some of that right now. That usually, I would think, and this is an interesting thing too. Usually, regulations change slowly in fintech, and that is not happening. That is not the case right now. I was thinking about what's going on with the Consumer Protection Bureau, and that is wait, and that's going away. It's you think about all the things you had to do to adapt to that, and then suddenly now that's changing. But that's only if you're in that. That's not all of fintech that's going to be affected by that. I think
you're affected with tariffs.
Tariffs are actually, one of my favorite, I'll put it this way, one of my favorite fintechs is Avalera. And I will tell you, I acknowledge I've done work with Avalera. They're my favorite company in some ways, to work for, as a client. I was wow, you have the best value prop because you keep people out of jail, in multiple countries. Because it's they're a tax compliant software, and it is such a deeply unsexy thing. But if you want to be a cool retail brand, it's cool. How you collect in taxes, right? And it's now with the tariff stuff going on, there's a lot coming at them at the moment. But they're a solution provider. They make it possible as a fintech. They're making it possible for the retailers to function in this, whether you're B2B, B2C, it's taxes got to get paid. So Avalera is a great example of they're doing great. And people need them. They can help you solve that. But do you think about your tax? How often do you think about the tax collection process on the other side of all of your e-com buys? Probably never as a buyer. Never. But that's because that is magically being taken care of. They're one of my favorites. I just think that they have the best, the best value prop. We joke about that. It's so this is the campaign where we can say, don't get fined. Don't get your assets seized. Pay your taxes. So, all right, we've got just a couple more minutes. If anybody has any questions, drop them over. Otherwise, I'm going to give you each a minute to sum up some things around what do you? I'm going to ask you each, what do you love about this industry? While we see if there's any questions, and I'm going to start with you, Cho. Why do you do this? You could work in all kinds of spaces you have before. Why do you love this?
I saw the future many years ago about this industry when I went to China. That's why I joined this industry. And this is almost 10 years ago. So I would say 2014, 2013. Yeah, I went to Beijing, and I think what I saw at that time was, people were using a lot of wallets and financial applications on the phone, and they were 5 or maybe 6, 7 years ahead of what's happening in the U.S. And I saw that really brought up commerce, right? That really increased the pace of commerce, and also increased financial activity among different corporations, entity, consumers, and it was very exciting. And then I came back to the US. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't see that here. So I wanted to, hey, maybe be part of the ecosystem where I can do something to create these software, right? To maybe help us to build out the financial ecosystem that can maybe help compete, with China or other emerging economies around the world, I think we still have a lot of room to grow, and I think with AI, that pace of competition is actually gonna speed up some more. But I think the intersection is so interesting. We can do so many wonderful things. Just to kind of give you an example, a lot of the work that I've done in fintech is actually around lending, right? And lending, a lot of people think, oh, okay, you check people's credit report, and then from there you kind of get a sense of his creditworthiness. But actually, the latest advancement in lending is really not about looking at all these official reports or scores from credit bureaus. It's really about alternative data, working with alternative data, figuring out the person, right? By looking at all these data that's associated with that person. And then you kind of make a guess about his creditworthiness, whether or not you should lend him. And then also there are other data points, you can pick up whether or not this person is about to default on the loan, right? Just by maybe even monitoring some things on social media. I mean, there are things you can pick up. And so I think with the power of machine learning models today, you can do so much more. And I love to, build software and technology that can really empower financial companies in these ways.
Mm-hmm. I would say it's funny. Early on, we were saying like young people you're using their mobile and they don't want to go into a bank branch, and middle-aged people don't want to do that either. I do not have time for that. I get very annoyed if I have to go in a bank branch. So I think that's Gen X and down, maybe. I don't know. I don't know anybody that likes to go to the bank.
A lot of people love it. You'd be surprised. A lot of people love it. A lot of people love to call and speak to operators. I'm serious.
No way.
Yeah. They really like it's their time to communicate, and they know some of the people, at the branch, like their personal relationships also, you know what I mean? They're being important. And this is why this industry is so much fun. There's something for everybody. I'm telling you, like there's like anything that you want to do, there's going to be, some kind of a client segment, for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's mature in the sense that if you understand the best practices and how to do this right, how to build team correctly, how to do how to accelerate your software development process and all that, like you can bring that and infuse that into it. But the big jump, or like the big deal is going to be AI. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's going to be like the next big jump, because at this point, okay, you can have another neobank, but you know what? You're going to go to Estonia and buy another software platform from them and white label it. Like that's just what people are doing. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it's at a point where there's just enough of the stuff that could be white labeled. So it's not as creative as it used to be. It's more of the like piecing these modules together in the right way. Mm-hmm. There's a place for that. Listen, it's great. You can still make money from that. But I'm just saying, like, for true innovation, I think that this is what you said, like figuring out the large language models, figuring out like agents, like doing all of these things. And, I wonder if in the next 5 years, we'll be totally building software differently.
Mm. If I were building a fintech, I would want both of you on my boards. It's like, I think we'd have it covered. We'd be the perfect, like, you could go recruit the rest of them. But like, if I just have the two of you, that would be my.
You know what? It takes time to learn how to properly build teams in any business. Mm-hmm. Takes probably about 20 years minimum. And people say that like, you can, just get to you probably in the first 10 years, you learn 80% of it, but it's the remaining 20% that's really going to make the difference between knowing when to, cut the teeth. Like you need, it's not something that you can read in a book. You have to work side by side. It's an apprenticeship system. You have to be next to a great CTO. You have to see how it's done. It's the only way. Like somebody has to show you, you know what I mean? The right way and the 99 wrong ways and one right way. And then if you're lucky enough to model that, then you know it. Then you can train other people. But in the absence of that, people are going to just like flounder. You know what I mean? Like it's just going to be kind of like quicksand.
And what you both mentioned are challenges and opportunities that are just evolving. And one of the passions for X Team is that we like to help people solve problems and address those challenges, whether it's a pre-revenue startup all the way to a top 50 multinational company, because all those challenges and approaches are different. But what you both mentioned absolutely are real business problems that have to get addressed because they don't go away.
They really don't. Well, I think on that note, I don't see any other questions. I did say Carl had given us a comment earlier about regulation, right? I think we did wind up touching on that a bit, that just the regulation being the biggest difference between what happens in fintech. And I do think there is an extra layer of that. And I think we're seeing some of that complexity play out. But I think just to kind of give us to wrap us up here, it's like, I think the big takeaways for me, is my favorite things in this conversation, as we're chatting about this, it's just thinking about how it is different, but it's also the same. Right. I think in the past, we might have thought they were very far apart. And I even think about in a time working, honestly, on some stuff for JP Morgan, like around how did they recruit their talent? Like when they had to compete with the fintechs that would give them stock options when they weren't going to do that. So it was like, how do we get people to come here? Because everybody became a tech company, right? And like as they work through that, I think that we've kind of worked through that bit. But I think I also hear just how there's still so many opportunities for innovation in this space. Like, I think in some ways we're just getting started. I really do. I think like some of the things we didn't even talk about crypto, we didn't even talk about blockchain, only a little, but those are some technologies that I think are still finding a home and finding a way that it's going to be, those are some of the most in demand, tools that we're going to be using in AI. Everybody wants to talk about AI. AI makes it better, AI makes it worse. And then finally, what it looks like to build and lead a team in this environment. I think in some ways, we have more options. You're not limited by the people who live near you. You're not limited by people who've only worked in certain areas for 20 years. Like, I think that it's great to have those options, but I think if you're a CTO right now, that also creates a lot of complexity. Mm-hmm. And your ideal team is not likely to be like one thing or another. You've got to work through those dynamics. And that's where I think even like the mentoring, like you were mentioning, Julia, like working alongside somebody. And I think, Cho, I know we connected because you're part of like a CTO group. Having those kinds of mentoring and peer relationships, I think are critical right now.
So important.
Mm-hmm.
So important.
Yeah. And that's kind of what you got me thinking about is like how we build that and how we create those structures for people. We have to create space for that because sometimes we just feel so frantic, like must build this thing, must ship, must solve this problem, must fix this. And it's like you're just pushing. But it's really about the people.
Exactly. At the end of the day, it's the humans that matters the most. So AI is just there to help.
Right? It says they only get you a little. My rule for using AI in my work is I ask myself, is this getting me closer to my customer or further away? If it's getting closer, so a good example of closer is I was able to use Gen AI to go summarize years of recorded customer conversations to develop, copy for a landing page. That's great. That's closer. Yeah. I'm using it to write all my blog posts. That's further, and I'm not interested. Right. Like, I mean, that's not fun. Right. It's like you have to figure out, like, am I getting closer? Or am I getting further away? And I think that's especially fintech experiences.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all so much for giving us this hour of your time. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
We dropped everybody's LinkedIn profiles over in the chat. Please come over, connect, drop questions. If you want to send follow-ups, do let us know. We will make this available on demand within 24 hours. It'll be out later today or in the morning. And if you have any other questions, just let us know.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks for the opportunity. It was fun.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.